Okay, guys, you should have a note set that looks like this. I will be doing your notes on a PowerPoint and just follow along. It follows along with the notes, but the PowerPoint has some things that I could do with it to show you some images. So what we're going to be looking at is the election of 1912. It is said that all of them were progressives, but we're going to just talk about how different these people are. We're looking at this political spectrum, liberal and conservative. On the left-hand side, we actually have Eugene V. Debs, which we know him from the Pullman strike. He organized the American Railroad Union, and he eventually forms the Socialist Party in America. So that's a very liberal organization, political organization that wants equality for all people. We've seen that their reaction to the Gilded Age, where the government is in the hands of the business. On the right-hand side, we have William Howard Taft. William Howard Taft and Roosevelt have gone in a little spat over Taft's presidency and the raising of the tariff, because the Payne-Aldrich tariff increased tariff rates. He's upset about Taft being a bigger trust buster and firing his friend Pinchot. And then we will see that because Roosevelt doesn't get the nomination, he's going to create his own party called the Bull Moose Party. And this is going to split the Republican Party in half, which basically sets up for why Woodrow Wilson wins. You should have seen this political cartoon in your book. It has the Republican Taft with the elephant. That's the symbol of the GOP, the Grand Ole Party. And then we have Roosevelt right there. We see him as a bull moose with his spectacles. And the division of those two leads to Wilson being able to win the election. So we have to look at this election, and the two big candidates are Roosevelt and Wilson. Roosevelt has his party platform called New Nationalism, that he wants to regulate industry. He wants to consolidate the monopolies and labor unions by allowing the growth of regulatory agencies, such as, we know regulatory agencies today, such as the IRS, the FDA, the Securities and Exchange Commission. He wants those to grow to be able to protect the consumer and also to do stuff for the business. He was also an advocate of women's suffrage and social welfare, creating a minimum wage, creating social welfare things such as social insurances as health care, but that won't be achieved in this time period. We'll see that later. However, Woodrow Wilson believed in fragmentation. What that means is enforcing antitrust laws that would lead to the fragmentation of big businesses, that would allow for small enterprise entrepreneurs, businesses to be able to function in an unregulated, unmonopolized market, that the market would do it on its own. The government did not intervene only by using antitrust laws. And he shunned social welfare and women's suffrage. We're going to see that Woodrow Wilson will win because the Republicans are divided. Eugene V. Debs does make a great stride for the Socialist Party, countering 6% of the vote. And this will put stress on the two other parties that they need to at least appeal to the masses. We see Woodrow Wilson doesn't win the majority of the votes, but he wins 41%. Because the Republican Party is divided in half, Theodore Roosevelt gets 27%, Woodrow Wilson would have got 23%. If they would have stayed together, we would have seen the Republicans would have won. But because they have divided up, we will see Woodrow Wilson will become a minority president. Woodrow Wilson, these are just some characteristics about him, which will actually help us when we get into World War I. We see he was very intelligent. He was president of a college. He believed in the informed masses. He is a pacifist. That means he's against war, but the irony is that he's going to take the U.S. into World War I. We see that he is very religiously based. A lot of that stems from his dad being a minister. And we see that he was a history major. He had a law degree. He's very moralistic and idealistic. And just like this last quote said, if he was forced to choose between a principal and a friend, he would choose the principal. The friend had to go. And so we're going to see this play more into World War I. But his methods of achieving progressive reform really stem from appealing to the people and public opinion. We'll see that in World War I. He is actually going to make appearances in both the House and the Senate. and this is going to change the tradition since Jefferson that no one had stepped in. He's going to come in and ask for legislation. He is going to support his party. We see that he keeps his meetings with the Democrats very private. He's going to use the courts to get stuff done. He's going to use the House and the Senate to get legislation done. And he believes that if we're to get this done, very intelligent and can-do people need to be appointed into office. So William Jennings Bryan is going to come in, and we will see he will be his Secretary of State. Once World War I breaks out, Bryan leaves. FDR will be appointed Secretary of the Navy. He just has able and capable men. His first part of his administration is really dealing with fragmentation of business. But in his last 2 years, he's actually going to appeal to Roosevelt's new nationalism, to appeal to those Republicans who left the Bull Moose Party to possibly gain him as Democrats. So in implementing new freedom, he's really trying to take down the triple wall of privilege. The first thing he's looking at is taking down the trust. Then we're going to talk about the banks, and then we're going to talk about the tariffs. So he's going to create, with the support of Congress, the Federal Trade Commission that is going to look at industries engaged in interstate commerce who are doing unfair practices, including unlawful competition, false advertising, mislabel, alteration, and bribery. So basically, he's giving an agency regulatory powers to go enforce laws that we've previously seen, such as the Hepburn, the Elkins, and the Sherman. He's going to strengthen the Sherman Antitrust Act with the Clayton Antitrust Act that allows unfair discrimination in prices, because remember, our big businesses are getting better prices compared to our small farmers, and stop interlocking directories. The biggest reason why the Clayton Antitrust Law is a red letter law is because it's going to exempt labor unions and agricultural organizations from being considered monopolies. And it's going to allow for them to legally strike and peacefully picket. The other thing is he's going to take down the tariff. We've seen this as a platform of the Democratic Party is always to lower the tariff, because the tariff means higher prices for consumers. We're going to see every single tariff, usually in U.S. history, is an upward revision, except this act called the Underwood Tariff. Just by its name, it tells you that this tariff is going under. It's going down. The other thing he's going to look at is banks. And one of the things that he realizes is that every 20 years we're having a panic. So let's appoint a committee to look at what's going on. And what the Pujo committee realized is that there's an inelasticity of money. So when a panic happens, all of the money is concentrated in big cities. So it doesn't get to small rural areas. And this is what the populists have been saying, that they wanted inflationary policy to help them get through these hard times. And the Pujo's committee saying, look, we know why the panics get worse, because money gets concentrated in big cities like New York, Dallas, Austin, DC. And what they recommend is for a decentralized bank in the government to move money around the U.S. so that we wouldn't have a concentration of money in big cities. So what they're going to create is the Federal Reserve System. And what they do is they set up regional banks in areas that could adhere to crisis. So I got to talk about a couple of things. You probably have noticed, I don't know if you've ever noticed on your money, but there's a lot of numbers on your money. So I just pulled out $1 right here. Do y'all see how it says 11, 11, 11? This tells us that it was made in Dallas. That's a regional bank. Let's look at this dollar. This one says 666. That tells us it was made in Atlanta. This one says 555. That tells us it was made in Richmond. This one says 444. This comes from Cleveland. Okay, this one's 222. This tells us it comes from New York. So essentially, our government has done regional banks that in crises, that these regional banks can meet the needs of the smaller rural areas. So if, let's go to Hurricane Harvey. And I'm bringing up a modern day example because this is what the Fed does. In Hurricane Harvey, people realized my debit card is not going to be worth much at this time, because what happens when the electricity goes out? So people made runs on their banks. They wanted to get as much paper money out because this could get them stuff. And so all of a sudden there was a crisis in Houston. They didn't have enough money in the area. So Dallas, the regional bank, realized that, and they started printing out more of this money, sending this money to Houston so that people could be able to meet their demands of what they needed. So let's just talk about the functions of the Fed. Basically, the Federal Reserve System is a nationwide banking system of 12 regional districts, and each regional district has its own bank to meet the needs of the banks in that area that are in the Federal Reserves. This is not a bank for me and you. This is a bank for bankers, that when they have crises, their needs can be met. Their power, they issue federal money. So we look at these dollar bills and we're like, oh, they're just dollar bills. But if you look at the top of it, it says a Federal Reserve note. It is a note, it's a promissory note, because these notes, we've been talking about this, people used to be able to take up this money to the bank and the bank would be able to give it gold. And so now money could be issued or increased or decreased as swiftly as needed. And we remember the populace were saying this is why they wanted silver. They wanted more paper money. So the Fed is going to regulate the flow of money. One thing is going to set the discount rate, the rate of interest that banks will be charged each other if they need money. It sets the reserve requirement, how much money must be kept in the banking system. And it's going to lead to the open selling of government bonds and securities. So basically the Fed is going to meet the government's needs in times of crisis. It's going to regulate the banks, and it's actually going to be able to support some money for the government through the buying and selling the securities when it needs it. And we'll see that more in World War I. And so getting ready for the election in 1916, Woodrow Wilson realizes, well, I'm not going to win on my own if the Republicans are united. So he's going to pass some legislation that is actually going to be very epochal in setting foundations for things we know today. Lafayette's Seamen's Act is actually going to give a decent treatment and livable wage to American merchants, seamen that are on American merchant ships, which kind of leads to a minimum wage we know today. Workman's compensation, you probably have heard that. If you're hurt on the job, your job is responsible to help you. This is going to be done at the federal for civil service employees, but this will eventually make its way down to every crevice of society that we know today. The Child Labor Law Act restricted child labor in interstate commerce, and the Adamson Act is going to restrict workers from working over 8 hours that are involved in interstate commerce, the work on the trains, and if they worked over that, they get paid for overtime. We're going to see another epochal thing is that he's actually going to appoint the first minority to the Supreme Court, Louis Brandeis. Every time we have a first for like an African American being appointed on the court, a woman being appointed on a court, a woman minority being appointed on the court, we will have to know those for the EOC. He gets the 18th Amendment passed, prohibition, and we're going to talk more about this with World War I. And the 19th Amendment, even though he was against women's suffrage, he gets this passed. Most of these laws and amendments are different from earlier laws because in the Gilded Age, we saw that the laws always protected business. Here in this progressive era, we're seeing that these laws are protecting and helping the working man. Even though we see him doing a lot of advancements, there is some failures. He actually accelerates, sorry guys, I don't know why, my virus threat. Oh gosh, sorry guys. Okay, we see that he accelerates segregation at the federal level, enforcing Jim Crow and enforcing Plessy versus Ferguson. We're going to see in the 1920s that we restrict immigrants coming to America. And lastly, our radical groups like labor unions and their international workers of the world, we're going to make them synonymous with the idea that they're radicalist. And this is going to change our economic system. Okay, guys, the next thing we're going to do is we have a little bit more time today. I want us to get ahead in reading, and we're going to start a reading on the causes of imperialism. So Ms. Morgan will pass that out, and I'll have that on a separate video. If we don't have time for it today, we'll do it on Wednesday.